all for joining us today. This is Family Partnerships 3, our usual then discuss webinar, but focusing on this third part of our family engagement series, and the topic being building programs that reflect families' cultural diversity. Now I have the pleasure of presenting our guest speaker. I wish we could do like a little drum roll here. This is Zsata Williams-Spinks. She is the owner of Little Angels FCC, and she is the author of her own children's literature book, There is a Rainbow in Everyone. Zsata, would you like to say hi? Any words of welcome? Highlight your book, maybe?
Hi, everyone. Zsata Williams-Spinks. As you know, I'm also a FCC. And I am just honored to be here with you guys and to engage with you guys and share and learn from each other, because that's what it's all about, us learning and taking and imparting on each other.
Thank you so much, Zsata. And we really appreciate you being here. And to give you some more background on Zsata and her experience in early childcare, Zsata Williams-Spinks is a preschool teacher who has dedicated her adult life to educating young children. As an educator, she saw the need to help build confidence and self-love in children. She's dedicated to ensuring that upon graduation, her students, that they will be prepared and have the proper tools to embrace one's own culture, be empowered by it, and accept, embrace, and empower other cultures. While searching her own ancestry, it was revealed that she has a Trinidadian heritage. And when she was enlightened with this information, she decided to travel to Trinidad and explore the history and culture of the country. She became enamored with the way she was embraced by Trinidadians, as well as the music and the food. However, there was a moment when she observed a rainbow after a tropical rainfall. And this experience served as her inspiration in writing a children's book for her kids. Zsata has a student base that is extremely diverse, and she felt it was necessary to bring them all together. And a rainbow was the best way to do so. Rainbows blend colors together regardless of their differences. This is where There is a Rainbow in Everyone was born. She felt the need to change the negative narrative of immigrants and people of color. And Zsata Williams-Spinks, she is a native of Baltimore, Maryland, and now a resident of Granada Hills, California, with an incredible FCC center and environment, from what I've been told. She is also the youngest girl in a family of 7, and she is a wife and mother of 1, and she enjoys spending time with her family. Yes. And I see we have some folks excited to see you here in the chat, Zsata. Talon shares her excitement, and I'm really glad that you're excited to be here and that you've heard of her book. Yeah, since we have some other connections to Trinidad as well. All right, I'm loving this enthusiasm, and we're going to keep going just so we can stay on time. But welcome, Zsata, and welcome to all of our providers who are present here today. So what are our goals for today? What are we here to do? We're going to focus on these 3 goals, use them as your guideposts throughout the training. And essentially, we're here to reflect on why it's important to honor these different identities in the families that we work with, and even in our own families, quite frankly. So it's important to honor families' racial, ethnic, and cultural identities. We're going to talk on that. And from there, we're also going to evaluate and just think on our own programs and how our programs approach families' cultural diversity. And lastly, we're going to figure out how can our programs take on more culturally inclusive practices. Maybe we already have some going, maybe we can pick up some other ones. We're going to share all of that today. So let's kick it off with an icebreaker. I think I went a little too far. No, here we go. Yes, so the question for everyone, whoever feels comfortable sharing, touching on our cultural identities. What is an aspect of your culture that you are fond or proud of? Please share if you feel comfortable doing so. And when I'm discussing or mentioning culture, that we have many cultural identities. It can be maybe our racial or ethnic background, where our families or ancestors are from, what our traditions and values are. It can also be our local community, where we live now, where we used to live. So feel free to share an aspect of any of your cultural identities that you are fond or proud of. You can turn on your microphone or share in the chat.
Hello, everyone. My name is Guadalupe Velasquez. One of my culture that I feel proud of is my family being always together since years ago. We're a family that always dance together, and that makes me proud of my culture.
Thank you for sharing, Guadalupe. Would anyone else like to share as well?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Araujo. Culturally speaking, I identify myself as Afro-Latina. I think what's very fascinating in regards to that is that it's predominantly what I like about it is like basically the music, what Afro-Latino music. There's the fusion of the coming from like the African beats from Africa that's also been combined with Latin American music. So it's nice to see, that kind of blend in the Afro-Latino culture.
Thank you for sharing part of like how you experience that in your identity and being Afro-Latina. I appreciate that, Michelle. We're gonna keep going. So we started to touch on our cultural identities. And now we're going to touch on how those environments, how we experience those environments. So I invite you all to either close or open your eyes, but we're going to start imagining being at a family gathering, right? So we're all at our own individual family gatherings, you could say. We're with our families, we're accompanied by loved ones with food, music, everyone's favorite activities, whether it's a family reunion or Christmas or whatever you celebrate. Maybe it's just summertime and it's good for a barbecue. Just imagine that you are in that setting. And then start to think about the little details that make that experience what it is. So imagine and think about, how does everyone greet each other? Are there nicknames? Do people hug? Do they kiss? Do they shake hands? What customs does your family have around food? Who cooks? What games or activities are the children and or adults doing? What type of music is played? Is anyone dancing? What other traditions are involved? And so as we're imagining this environment, I'm going to assume that many, if not most of us, feel pretty comfortable in this environment. It's a cultural environment that we are familiar with. It might feel like home for many of us. And so we can feel very comfortable in that environment, more likely than not. And now let's start to think, how would we feel if we went to someone else's family gathering? How would we feel if we went to an environment where our family's culture was not reflected? So let's say we feel like maybe a fish out of water, for example. And from that question, I want you to consider, how would we feel if we were in an environment in general, like where our culture isn't reflected? And speaking of our early learning programs, how does our early learning program approach race, culture, languages, and ethnicities of the children families we serve? Do they feel like a fish out of water? Do they feel comfortable? These are questions that we're going to be touching on today. And I wanted to sort of walk us through this experience of a family gathering and how that might be great for someone who is really immersed in that culture, and challenging for someone who might not be familiar with that culture or doesn't see their culture represented. And I really appreciate the conversation going on in the chat. I'll touch on it when I can here and there. So now we're going to touch on why this is so important. Why is it important to recognize families' racial, ethnic, and cultural identities? So I have some research, but I also want to hear whatever you would like to share, whether it's our guest speaker, Zsata, or other providers. So why is it important? And here are some points for us to consider. First off, the research shows us a good amount of information, and some of those findings include that the cultural competency that children have affect how they view themselves. So if children feel more comfortable around different cultures, they're more likely to have a positive self-concept, meaning they have higher self-esteem and can have a positive identity as human beings, how they view themselves. And so how is it that they form these positive self-concepts? They do this by honoring and respecting their own families and their own cultures, and also have other people honor and respect key aspects of their identities as well. So just as we provide an environment and create this sort of space for growth and exploration in their cultural identity, children are bringing in their own cultural expectations, their own abilities, their own skills and values, all related to their culture. So it definitely becomes a melting pot, and then it depends on like what is coming out of that melting pot. Is it a positive self perception? All right. The research also shows that children are aware of race and are acting on their own accord. Now, maybe they don't have our ideas of race and culture and ethnicity, but they're forming their own ideas based on their experiences. Regardless of whether or not we're directly addressing it, they are actively experiencing it and making their own opinions. And in fact, research has shown that children as young as 3 months are aware of racial differences. And by the time they move on to preschool, they make choices based on race about with whom to play and how to play. So our environments play a big role in that, and what we might intentionally or unintentionally promote. And from there, we also have research findings that show early learning spaces tend to lean towards highlighting white experiences and sort of centering white experiences, which can have harmful consequences. And this might be uncomfortable, but these conversations are important to have and hold space for at the end of the day. So when we're talking about this research finding, it's basically showing that early learning environments and materials, they often show like values and belief systems that are more prevalent in traditional white customs. So when this isn't like noticed, or it's not counterbalanced with images or stories, maybe other characters from other cultures and races, it places an importance on white early childhood experiences. And so we miss this opportunity to teach children that all races should be valued. And as a result, white children may subconsciously learn that their race holds a privileged status compared to others. And non-white children may learn that their race does not hold that same status. It's a difficult pill to swallow, but these are important findings that can help us be more intentional for our programs. And lastly, the last research finding I want to touch on is children excel socially and intellectually when they engage in cultural education. So it's not just a matter of like, it'll help them have more anti-bias behaviors in the future. It also helps them build their social and intellectual skills with more exposure. And the research shows that engaging children in culturally responsive experiences helps them build their self-confidence and skills, increase their awareness and appreciation and inclusion of diverse beliefs and cultures, and maximize their academic achievement and educational success. So as you can see, this isn't just a who feels comfortable kind of factor. It affects many aspects of a child's life and all the children's lives. And then from there has a ripple effect onto the families. And from there, I really just want to highlight that at the end of the day, they're watching us, and you know this far better than I do. Children are watching us and they're learning about us, and they pick up on how we handle issues of race and diversity. They pick up on what our values are and who we esteem. So we need to lead by example in promoting awareness, understanding, and acceptance of races and ethnicities and cultures that are similar and different from ours. I'm in no way assuming that no one does this. I'm assuming many, if not most of us, actively do this. And then maybe here we're creating this environment where we could talk about how can I reflect and deepen certain practices? What are some new practices that I haven't heard of before? So let's see who else we have in the chat. We see, yes, Maria Rodriguez mentions, we are the example for our children, showing them that all ethnic and cultural identities are important no matter what. I very much concur, Maria. Thank you for sharing. All right. So moving on, now let's talk about families' funds of knowledge. So for those of you, and if anyone wants to share, feel free to turn on your mic and pitch in. Like, I don't want this to be a lecture format. Go ahead, Zsata. Yes. Turn on your microphone if you can.
I wanted to express that it's important that we help build a sense of confidence in kids. Be proud of who you are, be proud of the skin that you're in, and be proud of your family traditions, and welcome those into your centers. Because it's so nice to see them learning about each other, their cultures. And I myself travel frequently, and I bring the cultures back. So what I do is say, okay, kids, you know, I'm going to travel. Where should I go? And they're like, oh, let's go here, let's go there. You should go there. So when I go to various countries, I immerse myself into the native land, and I'm with the native people. I don't do the touristy thing. And I bring that back to my center, and my kids love it. And so I not only am I teaching them about culture, but also on the map, well, this is where I'm at on the map. So there's various ways of educating them as well. You know, when I went to Thailand, one of my children was actually there visiting for the summer, and I met them there. And so it was just the best experience ever. And I brought that back. And then she also brought that back to the kids. So then we were having conversations, and the kids engaged, and they were so excited. And one of my kids is like, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to be a teacher, and I'm going to travel just like you. And I'm like, yeah, because you can do this. If that's what you want to do, never put a limit on what you can do. Always go out there and learn something different, because we're so much more alike than we are different.
Definitely. Thank you, Zsata, for sharing that. And I really appreciated Zsata sharing about her travel experience. We had other conversations in preparation for this training. And so we'll also touch on how to incorporate these cultures without necessarily leaving our programs or traveling abroad the country, and how we can get creative and collaborate with families along the way. Alrighty, so we're going to keep going. So what am I referring to when I say families' funds of knowledge? Really, it boils down to, okay. Well, no, they're all going together. Okay. Families' funds of knowledge is referring to the wealth of knowledge and skills that we all have that contribute to our overall success. So sometimes that knowledge is more technical, or like a formal education degree, or whatever the case might be. But it can also just be our street smarts, or how to manage a system in town, or how to, you know, order certain products, whatever the case. We have a wide variety of funds of knowledge. And this knowledge comes from different life experiences, and it's especially relevant information to our location, our culture, our local norms, our social groups. So this is something like a term that I want all of us to consider, because when we're partnering with families, we might not know where to see their strengths, where they lie. And funds of knowledge can help us see, well, hold on, they have so much to offer. And let's talk about the different types of funds of knowledge. So I've touched on this before. Some of you might recognize it. And if you do, great. And if you don't, let's get familiar with this term. So this is not a complete list. This is just possibilities of families' funds of knowledge. And this includes home language, or languages if they're multilingual. We have community and safety systems, caregiving, family values and traditions, location, transportation methods. If you know how to take the bus to downtown, that's a great skill to have. That's a great knowledge base to have. And as well as your family and friends network, learning and communication styles. Maybe we have families who love to learn via YouTube videos, and that's a great way to reach them. We also have household habits and chores, family occupations, educational and recreational activities, media, and health knowledge. And this is by no means a full complete list. This is just like a splash of what we can see that families have to offer. So some examples of how this can show up in children that we work with can be like from their own experiences. They can recognize, for example, let's say we go to a bakery. there's many different kinds of bakeries, you could say, or places where baked goods come forward. So for example, we have 4 different kinds of bakeries right here. And this is where a cultural aspect of a funds of knowledge comes in. So we have, I believe it is a Korean, no, it is Chinese food on the far left. It's, I believe, a Chinese bakery on the far left. And then probably a US American bakery, more American style eatery on the second picture. And then below, Trinity Pizzeria, so that would be more Italian baked goods. And on the far right, we have a Mexican restaurant, Mexican panaderia. So these are all sort of variations of different businesses that children most likely have experience interacting in their real life. And here, this program is highlighting the different experiences in the different cultural aspects of these environments in their program. So a child can have their own wealth of knowledge just through their day-to-day experiences. And here we can see it a bit more in a detailed manner and figure out what they notice is different, what they appreciate. Maybe they know this is how you order here. This is my favorite pastry here. You know, this is my favorite pizza order here. And that's all part of their funds of knowledge as well. So now let's talk about reflecting on our culturally inclusive practices. We've already touched on why it's important. And though I haven't seen many comments in the chat, based on the research I shared, I'm under the impression widely that you're here because you care about this topic. So we're all pretty much on the same page that it is important to value families' racial, ethnic, and cultural identities. And now we're going to have more of a deeper conversation on what does it look like in our programs. So when we reflect on our culturally inclusive practices, there are some great questions we can ask. And I broke down these questions into 4 categories to just sort of, start to stir the pot and get us thinking. So, focusing on representation and languages. So specifically for representation, what are we talking about? We're talking about how do families see themselves and specifically their race and their ethnicity in our programs? Where do they see themselves? And more than that, how do we as staff members talk about appearance and bodily features, whether it's skin tone, hair texture, other specific features, even clothing? Those are all different aspects that are the bits and pieces, you could say, of our cultural and racial identities. And I invite you all to answer in the chat, how do families see themselves in your program, in your programs? If you want to share in the chat, I'm going to continue reading on the language questions, but please go ahead and share in the chat. Answer whichever question you would like to answer. As for languages, some questions that we can ask ourselves include, are our program documents available for families in their preferred languages? Yes, many of us might have access or the capacity to offer English and Spanish documents maybe. What about other languages? Are we fully aware of what languages are used in our families' homes? And from there, other questions to talk about language include, how do we support and include families who speak other languages? How do we support bilingual children's early language development? And how do we work with families in this matter? Now, for those of you who might know, this is more of a tangent, but we're currently we're setting up projects for, trainings for dual language learners, and specifically for families and providers. And that's something you might want to check out later on. Keep an eye out for our emails. I see Aurora Reyes shares in the chat, seeing items in class that represent various cultures. Thank you for sharing, Aurora. That's a great way to represent different, or the different families that we serve. Would anyone else like to share, specifically focusing on representation or languages? Maybe some things that you've done in the past, things you hope to do.
I would say, as far as languages, utilizing the family's home language in the classroom as well. So one of the classrooms that I worked in before I started at FCC, we labeled items on the shelves in English and in Spanish. so that it can represent those who were Spanish speaking.
Mhm.
And so it worked out because you have kids that speak English that are learning Spanish, kids that are speak Spanish learning English, and then it helps to kind of bridge that gap.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing, Aurora. And those are some great examples for how you can make it pretty manageably possible in your programs.
Also, too, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Also with one of my children that was from Thailand, she taught us how to greet each other in the language. And so you just ask those questions. Families are more than welcoming to oblige you in that way. They're like, oh yeah, you want to learn this? Absolutely. You know, even with doing food and say, well, can you, you know, share some of your cultural food? I've had several families that like, yes, let's do a party. Let's bring food, you know, and we do that. And it's so inviting. And the kids are like, oh, wow, that tastes really good. Something that they would have never had before unless it was introduced to them in that way, because kids would try things with other children versus an adult saying, hey, try this. Their friends are saying, hey, this is really good. Taste it. My mom made it. They're more willing to open up and try it.
Thank you, Zsata. Yes, it's a very helpful, positive peer pressure there that can encourage their exploration.
Also, one of the things I did too with my kids is we took a trip to Alvera Street and had the parents that would speak in Spanish and translate for us in English. And that was a great experience.
Yes, those kinds of culture opportunities when really can also just take advantage of the richness in our community that's already at our disposal, that in many situations is probably low cost or free, at least to enter. You know, transportation is a little trickier, but it is definitely it's more possible. So we've touched on representation and languages. Now we're going to move on to reflecting. Now we're going to move on to routines and customs, as well as celebrations and holidays. So there's a lot on this slide. Let's do it bit by bit. Focusing on routines and customs, what kind of questions can we ask ourselves? Let's talk about food. Does our program explore food from different cultures? Some of you have already shared those examples, and we can always get creative. And really, I just want to encourage, like, let's get those parents, those family members, you know, aunts, uncles, grandpa, foster parents, you know, step parents, let's get them involved as well. And clothing, do we talk about clothing and its significance, especially, for example, when it's related to culture and ethnicity of our families? For example, if you have family members who dress in hijabs or burqas or yarmulkes, turbans, they have bindis or beards for specific reasons related to their cultural identity, let's create spaces where we talk about that. And families, if they feel comfortable, can be invited to be guest speakers and talk about the significance of their clothing and appearance. As for music, do we listen to music in different languages or songs? It could be in a different language, or it could be a song that maybe is in English, but is talking on a different culture, different country, different holiday tradition. And as for personal care, do we create awareness, understanding, and respect among children for each child and family's personal care? Now, when I'm talking about personal care, to make it sound more relatable, I'm really talking about, for example, if people have natural hairstyles or textured hair like afros or braids or other hairstyles, or if they have hijabs or burqas, like, is that being respected? Is that a piece of conversation where children can ask questions and can feel comfortable trying to understand what's going on there? You know, why do they have that preference? Is it okay for me to, like, what are their boundaries? Can I touch? Can I not? Can I ask questions? And like create a safe space for curiosity. And then when there are future occasions as they're growing up, they'll either have the knowledge or have the social skills to say, you know, I need to be careful with how I do this and be respectful in all that time. And celebrations and holidays. So some questions we can consider is, what celebrations and holidays do we incorporate in program? Oftentimes we have programs, or at least the traditional school-based programs I have seen, celebrate a lot of Christian holidays. But what about Hanukkah, Passover, Ramadan, holy festivals, Diwali, the Lunar New Year? There are a lot of holidays out there that are not based on Christian calendars, like Christmas and Easter, for example, or folks who don't celebrate Thanksgiving. And so do our programs incorporate that into calendars, for example, or other policies? And other questions to consider: how do we involve families when we're talking about these celebrations and traditions? Do they come in? Do they volunteer? Do they tell stories? How are they involved in this space? And how can we encourage them and create an opportunity so that they can be willing to share with our programs? Do they already share? Do they want to share? How can we get that going? And last question for celebrations and holidays: what is our current practice for talking about religions and religious and ethnic clothing and appearances? So this can go on to talk about, maybe they have certain family members have clothing for weddings or for special occasions. And we could talk about that in a safe and creative, supportive environment within our programs. And I have NORCON mentioning that they did henna during the summer in the past. Yes, and this can be a great way for a family member to share, maybe share their own experiences with henna, talk about when it's been used. For example, from what I know, one instance of when henna is used is during weddings. So these are great ways to expand our children's horizons. Does anyone have any examples from these two sections that they would like to share from routines and customs and celebrations and holidays?
Yes, I do.
Go
I'm
ahead.
gonna lower my hand because my hand was up. Okay. So what we've done in my program or my FCC was we discussed winter holidays. So when we discussed winter holidays, we talked about Hanukkah, Christmas, and Kwanzaa. And so different foods that are eaten. And so what I did is I went to a bakery that had the donuts that they eat for Hanukkah. And I brought them back for the kids. And I was like, look, I have these donuts, and so you guys get to try them or whatever. We were going to do potato pancakes. We didn't get around to it. But just so that they can see that these are things that are a part of that that religious tradition. And kind of bridging it all together. So like you mentioned about the Christian holidays, well, there's other things that are going on in December too. We don't have any children in our program that celebrate Hanukkah, but we wanted to introduce them to that. And then I had kids going home and they were talking about Hanukkah forever. and one of the kids, he was school age because he was doing distance learning with me. And his guardian thought that he had learned it on Zoom with his teacher in the classroom. I was like, no.
That was right here.
It was here. He didn't learn that with that lady. So.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. That's super valuable. And I really appreciate that you took the extra, that you share about taking the extra step to go get this food, this traditional food, and like have that experience. And it really just adds to how they experience this exposure too. And especially with Hanukkah and exposing them, even if it's not something related to their peer group in that moment. It doesn't have to be relevant for us to learn about it and get exposed to it. So my question for you all is, how can we create opportunities for these conversations? And I'm referring to these conversations taking place with our staff, especially if we have more than one staff member, and with our families. How can we create opportunities for these conversations?
I think if you just have an open and authentic conversation with the families, they're more than willing to engage.
Thank you. And how do you normally take on those conversations? Is it, do you schedule it? Is it before, during, after program? How have you approached it in the past?
Don't pick up time. I have a conversation with them, say, hey, look, what do you think about this? I'm gonna throw this idea out there. Think about it, marinate on it, and let's talk about it next week. And then they give me their feedback on it.
Great. And thank you for sharing that, Zsata, especially because it's not like just an on the spot kind of interaction. It's more like, I want to share this with you. And it is deeper, more complex than maybe like a, can you remember to do this, or a whatever, a small errand. So it's great that you give them time to just really process and be intentional with what they want to share. We also have folks writing. Aurora shares newsletters. And Talin shares newsletters, definitely. Camille Martin shares parent meetings. Great. Great. Some other examples. Ooh, Hilda Rodriguez shares post on Class Dojo. I have definitely heard that has been very popular, especially during the pandemic, for those who are able to use that. Some other points I have here on the bottom half of this slide include, we can let families know from the beginning, let families know that we care about honoring their cultural and diversity and backgrounds. So it's not just a, let's do it. It's more like, let's be intentional and really vocalize to families. We care about this, and we want to show that we value your identities and that you are part of our program, and we see it that way. And from there, we can also get creative and maybe do a survey for family members' perspectives. This could be great for a bigger program if it's hard to touch base with all families, for example, or if you want to maybe go a little deeper and give them time to type things out or write things out by hand, depending on your capacity. And two other ideas include creating a committee of family representatives to reflect and share ideas. If you have maybe a parent advisory council or something like that, that can maybe meet periodically. Go ahead, Zsata.
One of the things that I love is grandparents that come in and they tell stories of, their culture, and it's just like, they draw the kids in because they're animated. So that I love.
Thank you, Zsata. There's definitely a gold mine there with grandparents. We also have Maria Rodriguez sharing a parent committee. Talin shares at her interviews before kiddos start, she has a question. Is there any cultural or religious information you would like to share? This is great because from the beginning, you can set a tone of, thank you, Talin, for sharing that. You can set a tone of, I'm here to create space for that as well. Like our program will create space for whatever cultural, religious information, preferences they would want to share, and like set the tone from the beginning. We talk about these topics. Clara shares, sorry, Miss Mouse is very sensitive. Clara shares all about me poster for children to work with parents at home. This is a great and very creative, hands-on way for them to not only share about themselves, but do it in conjunction with their families, take it home, really decide what do we want to put on here. And then what an exciting and like, frankly, adorable project to have up in your program. And Talon shares it opens up doors to communicate. I imagine it does, that question. Claire shares and sharing at school as well with the all about me poster. Thank you. Okay. And lastly, when we have these conversations and we have all this data, essentially, all this information from people, what are we doing with those findings? What are we doing with that information? So this can really mean, let's take the time and discuss what this means for our program. And when I'm talking about this discussion, you can imagine I'm not just saying staff or the people in charge. We're talking about the families as well. So how are those conversations taking place? Is it a few representatives? If you have a larger program, if you have 5, 6, or 8 parents, is everyone hopping on a Zoom call or just talking for a brainstorming session 20 minutes after program ends one day? It's just getting creative, and I want to encourage that we have intentional conversations with our families and what they want to see. So we found out all of this. What do we want to see now that we have this information? Okay, thank you all for sharing. I really appreciate that people are getting detailed and sharing your experiences. There are different categories, you could say, where we could take action for our programs, right? And now here we're touching on stories and books, as well as holiday traditions. So for example, for stories and books, there's really a lot we can do. So I'm only sharing 2 tips here because later on we're going to touch more on that. So when it comes to stories and books, specifically in honoring and valuing families' cultural identities, what can we do? We can invite families to share stories in class. A family member doesn't have to be literate or be comfortable with reading in order to share stories. They can verbally just share stories, and that itself is great for early literacy skills and can really bring in a different type of flavor, you could say, to storytelling in our programs. We can also be intentional with stories and maybe focusing on different aspects of identity, whether it's a different country or books about children from different backgrounds, and we can switch that out and rotate with time. And I'll touch on more later on in this presentation. As for holidays and traditions, we can incorporate families' religious holidays into programs. Some of you have shared, I want to say it was Talin, I could be wrong, that has a question in the survey or before a child enters their program, so that families can share cultural and traditional, religious and traditional customs that they might want to share, whatever information they feel comfortable sharing. And from there, we can also make sure to include images related to families' holidays and traditions in our program environment. So if we're going to have Santa up there, maybe we can also have other Kwanzaa or Hanukkah related images up around our program as well. Would anyone like to share any other examples about stories in books or holidays and traditions that they use in their program to honor families' cultural diversity? Any examples you have related to these two topics? Feel free to share in the chat or turn on your mic.
I would say Too Many Tamales is a great example of a cultural book where you have the children who fear that they've let their elders down, and the story comes full circle when they allow the children to become involved in the process and cooking the meals and preparing that family dinner. So I would say that's a great example.
Thank you, Eric. That is a great example, and it can maybe even inspire children to explore cooking at home with their families.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We also have Maria Rodriguez sharing La Loteria is a book. It's actually a family game for some Latin American cultures. And it's also very visual and text friendly. So children can learn more key vocabulary. Whether or not you speak Spanish, you can learn that. Learn those keywords. Yep. It's been a while since I played Loteria. All right. We're going to move on. Thank you for those examples. So, see, I don't know why that text showed up now, but anyway, here we are. So now let's talk about imagery and text, as well as toys and materials. So when we talk about imagery and text, what kind of images we're using in our programs? Do we use images that include people of different skin tones, different cultural clothing, different appearances? And this can be in the books that we pick, in the images we put around program, in the, let's say, flyers, newsletters, documents that we use for our programs as well. And then we have as well, ensuring program documents and messages are available in their preferred languages. I think we touched on that earlier as well. And really a favorite of mine is encouraging families to share their family pictures. This can be priceless in terms of how honored and happy families will be to see their pictures in our programs. And it can be pretty low cost. I want to say at your pharmacy, you can probably print color pictures for less than $1 per family member. And that can be something that can be coordinated between the program and family members. And we also have Yolanda Harbour mentioning placing books of holidays in the reading area. That's a great way. And Michelle Araujo shares a family collage. Maria Rodriguez shares, yes, diverse books, music, and families bringing items from their cultures. Definitely. And toys and materials, I think we're overlapping here, which is totally fine. And so inviting families to bring in traditional toys is a great example as well. And we also have offering toys that reflect different facial features, skin tones, and hair textures can be all the more of an embrace for a child. And we also, from what I remember, this is also something to consider. And if we have, figures or people, toys that are basically, modeling humans, mixing it up with how we lay them out. So if there's different, let's say, shelves, and the toys are going to be on different shelves, maybe some days the Asian or Latin, Latino or Black or white, whatever, like they rotate them, and it's not having only like a certain identity or a certain group on the top shelf, for example, and just mixing it up intentionally. And that way we're showing ourselves there is no preference. It's just rotating it. That's it. So other toys and material related tips include inviting families to bring in cultural clothing for a dramatic play. This can be a great example for families to get involved in. And it's also just very exciting. Maybe families can help with the dress up too, for example. Zsata, you want to say something?
Yeah, also one of the things that we did crafts with making paper dolls of various skin tones and different cultures. And it was a super fun experience for the children.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, I can bet that is very exciting for them. And we have some other examples here. Dorothy Jones shares that they create homemade books. Yes. And Nurkan mentions she brings in board games, puppets, and drums from India for class. That must be super exciting. Clara Araujo mentioned diverse play in the food, in the creative play center as well, like the dramatic play center when it comes to acting. So mixing it up continuously in all the materials that we're offering when possible. And then from there, we also have food and creating space for curiosity. And we've touched on this a bit, but some examples include offering a family potluck activity so families can share their favorite traditional foods. As some of you have already shared, families are super willing to share their traditional foods. And it's a pretty exciting opportunity, not just for children, but for ourselves as adults too, quite frankly. It's a great time. We can also showcase foods from different families periodically. I think Clara is sort of highlighting that in her example, definitely. And other ways to explore diverse food or diverse cultural backgrounds through food is sharing stories about different foods and encouraging children to share about maybe their most common or favorite foods at home, what they eat when they visit family members or at gatherings. Maybe what happens when they visit grandparents and what types of food do they eat and how do they eat it? Is it, a certain way of eating? Is it family style, buffet style, or different utensils used? Do you have a certain way of serving certain foods out of respect or traditions? Those are all great aspects to touch on as well. And lastly, and probably one of the most important really, is creating a space for curiosity. And this goes really just to say that children feel comfortable talking about differences. Children feel comfortable asking questions. And maybe to us, it's a little weird or out of place or might make us feel uncomfortable, but these children have not picked up our discomfort yet. And so if we're smart and intentional and like, maybe not let that seep through, we can allow children to notice and talk about these differences, whether it's appearance, skin tone, language, etc. And from there, when we pick up on these different ideas that they might be ruminating on or thinking about, we can create teachable moments so that children can observe, can understand, and they can include and appreciate all these differences and just have different types of interactions with differences. And from there, we can take it the extra mile with our family engagement and share these conversations with family and continue that positive ripple effect so that children can really know, can really have that positive self-identity. So not just sharing these conversations with families, but letting them know, they have this conversation, this experience, and this helps them develop this positive sense of self, and that's priceless. Okay, Yolanda also shares she plays different music from different cultures. Thank you, Yolanda. Alrighty, so I have a video that I am super excited to share with you all, and we're doing pretty great on time. Hopefully this video quality will sharpen up a bit. But this is Sayantani Gupta. She is a doctor who practices narrative medicine. So she speaks about the importance of diversity in children's literature for children's sake and for a better future. So hopefully this cooperates. I do need you all to tell me if you can hear oh, here we go. I got it. All right, gonna press play. And Zsata, if you can give me a thumbs up if you hear it. Let me see.
Now, I know that sounds like an outlandish claim, but hang in there with me. What I have come to realize as a writer of children's fantasies is this. Children's books are in the really important and really hard work of building imaginations. Not just any old imagination, but radical imagination. Think about it. It's in children's and YA fiction that mice can speak and also wield swords, that little girls can befriend big red dogs, that wizards fly around on broomsticks while simultaneously vanquishing evil, and where a group of plucky young teenagers armed solely with wit and grit and a belief in themselves and each other can potentially overthrow an unjust government. So children's and YA fiction, in a sense, are our blueprints to the future. They are our roadmaps to tomorrow. For it's inside of these stories that children not only figure out who they want to be, but they figure out what sorts of worlds they want to live in. And they get the practice in figuring out how they want those worlds to manifest. And now, if there's ever been a time in history that we are in desperate need of this kind of radical imaginative act, I'd suggest it's right now. Because if we are to deal with the religious bigotry and violence, the racial injustice, the environmental catastrophes that threaten to rent our very world apart, we are going to need not just our present day adults, but our future adults, our future leaders and politicians and teachers and parents and artists to be equipped with radical imagination and also, I'd suggest, a sense of radical empathy, if not radical love, towards those who are like ourselves, but importantly, to those who are not like ourselves. And I think that children's and YA fiction has a really important role in this work. So of course, diversity and representation is a critical part of this conversation. You've heard that expression, you can't be what you can't see. Well, we're not going to be able to deal with these potentially catastrophic problems if we don't have all of our children and young people able to see themselves into the future, not just surviving, but thriving and powerful enough to make change. So stories in which children of all racial backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds are superheroes saving the world. Stories in which children of all family backgrounds are centered. Stories in which children of all genders and sexualities and economic backgrounds can see themselves as the protagonists. These stories do the critical work of making sure that all of our young people are equipped with radical imagination.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because honestly,
being deprived.
Honestly, it's really, really great, but we don't have all that much time. And those are the key points I wanted to touch on for this section. So in talking about reading and how it can empower and really affirm our children, the children in our programs, I really wanted to highlight this video. Hopefully you were inspired. She is probably one of my favorite TED Talk folks. And two tips I really wanted to share are, number one, choose books that help children see themselves. So this means including books that mirror different aspects of their identity, race, their background, their beliefs, of themselves in class, so they can see themselves in the story, as Dr. Sayantani mentioned. And also, number two, choose books that help children expand their understanding of others in this multicultural world. So this means including books that introduce children to new places, people, concepts that they might not have yet encountered. And this is how books can really open up what's possible for our children. All right. Thank you for that.
Of such stories.
Okay, we're gonna move on. Discussion panel time. We're doing pretty great on time. So I am going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other in Zoom. Yes, so if you feel comfortable, please turn on your camera so we can see each other in Zoom. Yes. Hello, everyone. Let's answer a few discussion questions. If I can get to it. All right. So I'm going to touch on, everyone is encouraged to answer this question, whether it's our guest speaker or our providers. And the first question is, how does your program approach conversations around cultural diversity? So this means with children and or families. How does your program approach conversations around cultural diversity? Whoever wants to share.
You mean questions from the children?
Yes, however it is that you approach these conversations. And if you want to share how you maybe managed a question from a child, that would be a great experience.
That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think like when maybe I can say when it comes to food, because there's one child in the program that that has a lot of food allergies and is also vegetarian. So her family brings her lunch. And so sometimes the other children are wondering why her food is different. And so then my staff and I just explain, oh, well, you know what? She can't eat the same things that you do because she has allergies and we don't want her to get sick. And so now they know, they go, yeah, we don't want you to have to get the EpiPen. So
that's super considerate, yes. And they can understand that other people's realities are different from theirs.
Right.
Thank you. In the chat, we have Maria Rodriguez sharing Zoom parent workshops as well. That's a great way. Maria, would you like to share a little bit more about that and maybe what kind of topics you cover or how those have worked? If you feel comfortable. If I can have one more person share on this question, we can move on to the next one. Maria shares having a topic that reflects everyone's cultures, so they feel included, I'm betting. Anyone else?
I have something. I sometimes sit around the preschool classrooms in the school district of Long Beach. And what I've noticed is that sometimes they have posters up on the wall of kids from around the world, of course, in their cultural attire. So I think that's a unique way of kids, being able to see kids like them, but of course, it's like they're seeing kids that are their age, but of course dressed differently or different skin tones. So I think that's a unique way. And there's even books that are tied into that. Like there are the small mini books for preschool level that also talk about kids from other parts of the world as well, from different countries.
Thank you, Michelle. Those are some great examples. And especially with the posters of children in different clothing styles from different parts of the world, having it be there consistently, like not just like a one child or one costume that's, used and then put away, having it be there consistently can create it like more normal point of view on it, or like more comfortable point of view on that. Dorothy Jones shares having material and books within the classroom environment. Yes. Okay, so I think my second question might overlap a bit with the first, but we'll make it work. So the second question, it's two parts. You can decide which one you want to answer. So the first part is, please share a creative idea around cultural diversity that your program has used and you want to bring to the table. Or please share a creative idea that you heard today that you want to use and you're going to take with you. So something you have done or something that you are inspired to do because of today. Clara Araujo is sharing, and this was probably for the previous one, but we're going to highlight her response. Clara shares family pictures in the classroom. Children's being a picture of their families, and then they have a wall for children to see all the pictures. That's great. And I'm guessing it's pretty present. It's not just like tucked away in a folder. It's right somewhere visible that the whole program can see. Nancy Varela shares music that children listen to at home, playing that music in the classroom. Yes, bringing that aspect to the classroom can feel pretty great because you feel like, part of me is coming into this environment in their own way of viewing that.
I like to say maybe connecting with other cultures outside of the country. My son's school previously, well, a couple years ago, they had a partnership with a school in Africa, and the school actually did a project where they made jewelry, and then they sent the jewelry over to our school, and they were able to sell the jewelry to help proceeds go to benefit their school. So that was a partnership that they did in the elementary school for the children.
That's really creative. Thank you for sharing, Camille. Yes, and I imagine that was a pretty unique experience for them as well. Noor Khan in the chat shares, sometimes she sews and takes Indian fabric for children to sew. That's pretty great. I explain different color patterns and textiles. We have Elizabeth Carvajal mentioning cooking activities to promote different cultures. Super popular too, I bet. And a great opportunity as well to involve families if possible, whenever it's, COVID safe. Maria Rodriguez also shares for Hispanic Heritage Month, they get all families involved in bringing their cultural outfits, food, and family pictures from where they are from, and children feel great bringing in their items. That honestly is warming my heart, just hearing that. All these examples, but that one, like showing all the different details can be pretty affirming to children. Thank you for sharing these great examples. We're going to move on to the next question, and this will be our last question for the discussion panel. We also have Hilda sharing that her parents the parents in her program make their own flags as well. That's really awesome. Okay, next question. Now, we have some different ideas. We know why it's important. How can we partner with families to make this happen, basically? My question says something else, but how can we partner with families? How can we get creative and partner with families to make these ideas happen? Maria Rodriguez shares communication and giving them examples and outcomes. That's a great point because we can let them know all we want, but if they're not sure what it's supposed to look like or what we expect, it's not going to be as easy or appealing for them to make it happen. Thank you. Anyone else? You can turn on your microphone. You can write in the chat.
As I said earlier, you can ask, throw it out there to them, give them a time frame to marinate on it, and then come together and collaborate together and make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Zsata. And Yolanda shares your same idea. Yes, asking the parents for their own ideas as well. And I think this is also just a great time to remember we're not alone in this work. We form a team with these families, and this is a great time for if we're not sure what to do or we're not sure what kinds of activities or practices or topics to touch in program around cultural diversity, we can ask families to participate, and we can ask them, how do we do this in a respectful way? How do we maybe pronounce these words in a respectful way? And for this clothing item, can you share about why it's worn and the significance and all of that? Yes. Anyone else?
I think the key for me is having the stuff available throughout the year. I think that many times we buy the stuff, we get the stuff, we put it out there, then we put it away. To me, it's like, let's keep it out. Let's have it out. So it's always available for the children to use and explore throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you, Jose Romero. And I think that can really help also just normalize diversity. That diversity isn't just like we had a fun activity for a week or two. Diversity is always existing. And in the chat, these last two comments I'm going to read. Nancy shares if they have a cultural project, take pictures and bring them to share, like cooking an activity or making a piñata and how they dance at home. Great examples. Heidi Gutierrez shares, check with families, what are their needs to build a foundation of trust. That is priceless advice right there, because it could be that different families feel different levels of discomfort. And so we might be wanting to have these really deeper conversations, but they might feel like, I'm not ready. I need some space. We need to build some connection before we can talk about something like that's personally and like to my family is very valuable. Thank you so much, Heidi. All right. I think that was a good comment to end on. I want to thank you all for your participation in that discussion. And now we're going to swing on back to the PowerPoint and finish off on a good note. Okay. Okay. I believe you can see just my screen. Okay. So here we go. At the end of the day, all this work, what we're doing here is that we're showing families that we see and value all aspects of them, including their attributes that are related to race, their ethnicity, their culture. We're showing them that we value them and we see them. And this is really important because it can help them feel welcome and connected to us, to our program staff, and to other families. And it all goes back to connection at the end of the day. Guess what? Resources. You know how it goes with me. I always want to give you all resources so you feel not just inspired, but prepared to keep going and take action. So we have observation forms. This is for family childcare programs, and it's already on our website. It's just a 1 or 2 page document to help you take observations, and you can give your own cultural diversity twist of how are we observing this? Do families feel safe and supported? And are their cultural identities recognized? We also have the center-based form as well. So we got FCC and center-based. Take your pick. And then we have QSLA diversity themed book list. There's a bunch of them. There are a bunch. I only show 4 here, but there are a bunch of them, including the Hispanic Heritage Month book list. We have National Arab American Month, Heritage Month, and then Black History Month book list, as well as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. There are other book lists as well, but I decided to highlight these 4. So check them out. They're on our QSLA website. And another resource I want to share is Sesame Street and Communities. If you haven't heard of them before, they're amazing. They have a ton of resources from workshops, articles, videos, little pages, little printouts that you can use with children. All of these resources are family friendly and child friendly. Like a workshop is not like half an hour, an hour. It's like a 10-minute workshop on a really great topic made for families. So 2 videos or 2 activities I want to highlight there is, for example, they have videos that show the Sesame Street characters talking about their facial features or aspects of their cultural identity. For example, this one talks about eyes, and this one talks about language and how Spanish is their superpower. I believe it's Lola's superpower. So I wanted to highlight that Sesame Street Communities is a great website. And Dahlia, I don't know if you did, but if you could please share this link as well. Yes. Dahlia, if you could please share the Sesame Street Communities link, it's right there. Their page on racial justice is really creative. And it's racial justice is a complicated topic, and Sesame Street Communities knows exactly how to approach it in a family-friendly way.